Okay, nice meeting everyone here. I met some of you yesterday, but for those that I haven't met, nice to meet you. My name is Roxy Williams. I am part of SGAC, and I am the project lead for Divinas, or Diversity in Astronaut Selection. So I want to first share with you a little bit about what is SGAC, and also a little bit of what we do in Divinas. So SGAC, we are a non-profit organization, and we have here I have highlighted the three purposes that we have. First one, which is create a global volunteer base of university students and young professionals in the space sector who have a passion for space or for making a difference in space, and we want to connect them with the space industry. The second point, as I mentioned before, connect them with peers and top space professionals from various organizations. And last, give the next generation of space sector leaders an opportunity to be part of the space industry and a voice in the global space policy. We have 5 main pillars in SGAC: events, project groups, professional development, scholarships, and UN-related activities. We as Divinas and also Figures, we fall into the project groups because we are part of the Diversity and Gender Equality Project Group. Now, talking a little bit about Diversity and Gender Equality Project Group, it started as a small part of the SG France event in 2021 as an Giant Leap, and then it grew out to be a project group in SGAC. And since then, we have been doing a lot of research in the different projects that we have in the group. For example, Figures, Research, Padawans, Divinas, and Communication and Outreach. And between those, we also have a lot of partners as well. And recently, we are also going to be partnering with CHASM, for example. Now with Divinas, as mentioned in the very first slide of my presentation, as Divinas, we focus on how to increase diversity in both the public and private astronaut corps. So within Divinas, we have 2 main research projects. One of them focuses on specifically analyzing and understanding astronaut profile evolution throughout the years. And the second one focuses specifically on doing a research on understanding parastronauts research, or specifically creating methods and experiments that we can implement in analog missions in order to understand how we can continue improving the space sector in terms of diversity and inclusion. Here you can see some of the team members of my team. Tomas is also part of Divinas, specifically with the parastronaut research project. And then we have a lot of people around the world in a very diverse team. One important thing I want to highlight is that in order to do a research specifically on parastronauts, we need to understand everything. And when we're getting involved in it, we also need to involve the people we're targeting. In this case, specifically people with disabilities or parastronauts. So for that, we started doing the research specifically on the ESA parastronaut fly, which in this case, this specific research was focusing on specific disabilities. In this case, it was people with lower limb deficiencies, leg length differences, and also people with short stature. And of course, through all the research that has been done in Divinas, it was important to understand some of the things that needed to be done, specifically, not just culturally, but also technologically. So thinking of future space habitat, be able to understand how we can make it more accessible and adaptable, so that we can have an inclusive space exploration. So for that, some of the examples I have added here are long-standing aspiration for space habitat, a future of extended human habitation in space, lunar mission, and Mars exploration, space agency visions for space habitats, how they will be changing or adapting the habitats specifically. And for all of this, like I said before, we need to involve the communities we'll be working with. Because one thing is that we have the perspective as people that may not have a disability, but it's different for the people that we're focusing on. And later on, I will speak more about that with Tomas as well. Then some of the inspiration we had gotten was also understanding different sports and activities that have been used or have been done and have included people with disabilities. I think Tomas also try out, or I think it did one of these specific exercises. For example, the Dive Pirates Foundation, they are doing underwater exploration for individuals with disabilities. Arability and Team Breed are just some of the few examples of people who are doing extreme activities, including everyone in their activities. And these are just a few numbers that I don't want to get into detail, but it is important to also understand the current context of how's the world based. So 60% of the world population experience a significant disability today, according to the World Health Organization, and 5% of the world population require rehabilitation to address their disabling hearing loss. And hearing loss I'm mentioning because our specific project or experiment was focusing on hearing impairment people. And these are some of the experiments that we had done that I can also mention later on, and to be more specific or detailed. And I just wanted to take a chance to mention some of the few examples, not just from Divinas that we have been able to see, but also in CHASM, for example. Tomas was one of the few people who was able to do an Analogue mission, for example. In Astro Access, they have been conducting parabolic flights with disabled participants to test accessibility features in zero gravity. And also, one of the biggest examples and inspiration, I think, for all of us, and the reason why, even I will say, we are partnering with CHASM, is Inspiration 4, for example. The private SpaceX mission featured Haley, or astronaut Haley, being the first person with a prosthetic leg to travel to space. So these are just a few of the examples that shows that we usually think that only able-bodied individuals are the ones that should thrive in the space sector, but everyone should be able to thrive in the space sector as well. Thank you so much, and we will be opening a call for volunteers by the end of the year, so if anyone is interested, please feel free to reach out.
Thank you, Roxy, very much for the introduction of SGAC to our audience. And I'm also very glad having the chance being here and discussing with you, Roxy, also the topic, the highly relevant topic of inclusion in the space sciences and in the space sector. I've prepared some questions for you. So my first question would be, with your leadership of the Divinas long-term project within SGAC's Diversity and Gender Equality Project Group, how can we make space exploration more inclusive to your mind, not only for women and underrepresented communities, but also for individuals with disabilities? What initiatives have you seen that combine these intersecting aspects of inclusivity, either within Divinas, the research projects that you can maybe introduce to our audience, but you can also mention any other initiatives or projects that come to your mind?
Absolutely, and it's my pleasure to also be with you and discussing here and sharing a little bit of the work that we have been doing in Divinas, but at the same time sharing some great examples like I mentioned before in the presentation. So one thing I consider it's important in order to make a difference or contribute to make space exploration more inclusive, not just in terms of gender or ethnicity, but also with people with disability, is that there should be a cultural shift, but also a technological shift. And the reason why these are the two main things I focus on is because usually, or most people think, as I mentioned in my presentation, that only able-bodied individuals are the ones that should thrive in the space sector, or specifically in space exploration. But that shouldn't be the case, because we have seen other people already doing experiments, doing missions, like you, for example, in Analogue missions. And technologically, because we also need to, of course, adapt locations, spacecrafts or spacesuits as well. In Divinas specifically, we started doing the first experiment in terms of space communication, specifically on how astronauts will be communicating if we have a crew member or crew members who are hearing impairments individual. So with that, we started to see how we could, in situations like emergency, how they will be able to communicate. So we use Arduino to make some images or identifying messages that can be used to communicate with the other astronauts. But now that we're partnering with other organizations and working together as well, we're hoping to do a even more inclusive research or experiment. And how we came up with it was the idea of having a crew that not only will have people with hearing loss, but also people who are hearing individuals. That are able to communicate with each other using sign language. Because most of the time, one thing that we understood, actually a few months ago, my team and I in Divinas, was that we shouldn't make the disability a problem, but we should be able to make together a possibility to work as a team. So that's why we said, if we want to create a crew of people who are hearing impaired with hearing individuals, we shouldn't be making the disability a problem. For example, with the first experiment that we did, thinking that the hearing impairment people should be using a computer to communicate through the messages, in this case, the experiment that we had done. But to be able to sign language as well, for example, the people who are hearing individuals. So we should be able to use these possibilities and always include the people in the opinion and execution and planning of the experiments in order to make a more inclusive community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you very much for all these insights. And I definitely agree with your efforts making space more inclusive, especially for the community with disabilities, of people with disabilities. This is actually also the purpose of our newly founded branch of CHASM, which is called PARACHASM, which the name represents the consortium which focuses on the different research ways in the subjects within the world of space sciences, as the inclusion of specially abled people within space exploration in future or already nowadays in the analog world is, in my point of view, a lot more than just the fulfillment of the Sustainable Development Goal 10, which is the commitment to reduce inequalities. You really have to consider a lot of interdisciplinary aspects, which PARACHASM is also trying to support, to highlight, not even to create awareness for this topic, but also to improve research in the various fields that are connected to the topic of inclusion in space sciences. Yeah, then maybe we can go on to the next question. When it comes to gender diversity and disability inclusion, how can initiatives like Divinas, for example, or PARACHASM collaborate to create a more comprehensive approach to inclusivity in space missions? What lessons can be shared between these two fields to advance the common goal of a more inclusive space sector, and what practical steps can be taken to ensure that parastronauts and other marginalized groups are part of mission planning and execution?
Yeah, it's always, I think, perspective. Once we are including all these groups and not just creating diversity including all the communities, it's that we're collecting all of these perspectives together. If we are not including people with disabilities in the research that we're doing, we're missing a huge part of that perspective that it is important to move ahead with the experiment that we'll be doing, which is something that we learned in Divinas. So in the first part of the experiment, the one I was mentioning in my presentation, we did a research and then found a few surveys and opinions from hearing impaired individuals. However, we were not including directly hearing impaired individuals in our group. And that might have made us as a team to miss a huge part of the research that will have been valuable for us in the future. And as soon as we understood that, we were able to see a different whole perspective of how we wanted to continue approaching the research that we were working on. So I think that's the very first step when it comes to creating inclusion, when it comes to working together. And the first step is including the communities, not just in the final stage of the experiment or in the final step of the projects, but since the very beginning, since the planning, execution, and at the end, when you're almost implementing it, they always should be involved in it, because otherwise we wouldn't be able to understand fully what we will be doing. We might be going in the wrong way or in the wrong path. So if we're involving everyone, I think that is the best way to create a really great experiment or project with people who are involved in the community.
Yeah, I would definitely agree, and that's also actually a purpose why PARACHASM has been created, and the idea behind PARACHASM, that we have realized within CHASM that often it's the case that people with a disability, especially able people, often have already some properties that are beneficial within their mindset of becoming an analog astronaut and tackling really different tasks, as everybody who has a disability, certainly from a very personal angle, can state that there are still a lot obstacles that have to be overcome. For example, for me as a wheelchair user, what can I do if the elevator in the next metro station is out of order? Or even here, what if a ramp to get to the stage is lacking? And there I would like to thank some parastronauts and analog astronauts who helped me to get to the stage and build a self-made ramp. So, and this is actually a sign and the mindset that especially able to often have, and that qualify them to join these missions. As I can also state from a personal experience, we have had to find a way during my own mission to survive a 5-hour power outage within Lunares, which from mission control, it has been stated to just had a duration for 30 minutes. So you have to develop not even psychological strategies, but also real ways to make life happen, even with these situations, even also having, like in this case, me participating in this mission as a person with a disability.
Yeah, and that's the reason why we should also work together. Because if we're not working together, we wouldn't have that perspective. And especially if we're focusing on one specific community, if we're not working together, things are not going to work out. So if you didn't have that connection with your team, for example, with your crew team, they wouldn't have been able to even help out because they wouldn't have known how. So it's important to work together.
Yeah, definitely. The aspect of really clear and good communication, I've also realized during my mission, is really, really essential to achieve a successful or a success within a mission, and that's yeah, definitely definitely true. Yeah, maybe to follow up with the next question I have. When, from your experience with SGAC in general, how do you think the global space sector is currently positioned in terms of diversity and inclusion? Where do you see the most significant gaps, particularly in relation to disability inclusion nowadays? And what actions can be taken to address these gaps? And now coming to Divinas in particular, how does Divinas research projects aim to close or bridge these gaps?
Yes, of course, in terms of diversity, inclusion in general, sometimes we say, oh, we're advancing, we're doing a lot of work, but that always just comes down to gender, ethnicity, but we're always excluding disabilities. So I know that NASA, for example, and ESA have made bold moves in terms of doing research, and ESA specifically with the ESA parastronaut flight, for example, working towards finding a way to create a more inclusive space exploration, not just for gender and ethnicity, but also in disability. But I still think that we're lacking a lot yet. There is a lot of work happening, like organizations like INSGC, through us, Divinas, PARACHASM now that it's been open. But there are still a lot of work that we need to do in terms of including people with disabilities. And in Divinas, we consider that with the work that we're doing, the first thing which is important, because many people don't know about it, is information. We need to share information, data, share perspectives. So all of the information that we're sharing will also help in creating awareness that space exploration or the space industry itself, it's for everyone, and we should be using this quote, I will say, space for all, actually space for all, not just space for gender, space for ethnicity. As someone who is also part of a minority, I totally understand how it feels to be excluded. So we don't want to exclude people from these certain groups that are also very smart people and that will bring a lot of knowledge for the different things that we will be doing. So in Divinas, I consider that way we will be contributing. And in terms of like the global space sector in general, I think we should start building strategies that can help involve more the community, or at least do this call out that there are people who might be interested in the space sector by even working on policy. And like I said, it is always important to involve the community from the planning, implementation, execution, and even from the ideation, I will say, or since starting ideas on what to do and how to improve the space sector, we need to include the communities.
Thanks. Also, as a member of SGAC myself, I would say that SGAC has really a great role, also being an observer within some or a couple of discussions that are happening within the United Nations, which also have all the SDGs in mind and are committed to peaceful uses of outer space, which are being regularly discussed in the UN. But you have mentioned a lot of points where PARACHASM is also committed to, and although we have just being like created, or we have just created us ourselves, we already have an action plan which actually have been under development already before even PARACHASM itself has been founded. And this brings me to the very important point that PARACHASM as an institution itself in general summarizes worldwide research that highlights various aspects of inclusion in the space sector or in the analog world. And one of these aspects, for example, is the topic of space architecture. And space architecture, architecture in general, as I've pointed out already here, is a very highly relevant topic, not only on Earth, but also in future, or already nowadays in space. Wherefore, together with Eleanor, we are conducting or have conducted a study within the last couple of sets of missions that have been conducted in Lunaris research station in the Analogue habitat, where we took a look on the accessibility of the habitat. And Lunaris is really doing a pioneering work, I have to say, and I'm trying not being biased because I've done mission in that habitat. But it's a fact that not worldwide, but at least in Europe, it's the only habitat that is performing missions with specially abled people, and therefore we had a look on the accessibility. And it took several years until a wheelchair user, in that case me, had a chance to participate in that in a mission within that habitat. But I can say, however, every wheelchair user and every person with a disability is very different. That I would say Lunaris is wheelchair accessible for active wheelchair users, definitely. However, there's still, like in every field, room for improvement. But I have the hope, and I think Lunaris also will improve, as the founders of Lunaris are all very skilled architects. For example, the results of this study we will also present at the upcoming IAC. So it's very, very interesting to dive into the different directions of the research within this field. But you have also mentioned the policy making, which is also a kind of very long-term project. And I am certain that this will also require a huge amount of collaborations, that PARACHASM won't solve this topic on our own. We will not solve this topic on our own, but creating a policy so that people with a disability, especially able people, in the future will have a better access in the space. However, I would like to emphasize that the ESA feasibility project and study is a very, very promising beginning, and I'm very happy that something like this is already on the way. But I'm considering this not as the final milestone. This is a beginning, and for all the next steps, a policy is definitely have to be made. And PARACHASM, for example, would like to contribute in a certain way to make all these rules, regulations, and a general policy for a successful inclusion of especially able people happen.
Definitely. Policies are sometimes most of the things that makes things work. We know that when we start speaking about countries, and many of them have their own way of making things work, I know that the example of ESA and NASA are huge inspirations that we hope that it reaches other countries. At least we see that some of the huge space agencies are making these changes, are doing these projects, and like you said, they are very promising. And this hopefully will serve as an inspiration for other smaller space agencies to start working, and that we together as a voice or as organizations can be able to also brought up all of the things that we discover, all of the things that we find out or worked on together, because that's the way that we'll be able to communicate, but at the same time share, build strategies, demand policies, changes or updates, and be able to also ask companies to work towards, specifically on spacecrafts, how they will be designing and even how they will be selecting astronauts. Because part of what we're doing in Divinas, which is the reason why the two research that we're doing are not excluded with each other, but they are connected with each other, because in one of them, we're trying to understand that traditional astronaut profile put in for so many years. And with the other one, we're trying to bring out how we can basically not break that traditional way or traditional criteria of selecting astronaut, but to adapt it to make it more inclusive and diverse in every term.
Yeah, definitely. And I would maybe like to add one small point that policies are important, definitely. Policies are great to set general rules. But I would like to ask you, dear audience, and everyone who is now here and responsible for one or other analog habitat, take a moment after this talk to think about, really think about how could you imagine your particular institution, organization, how within your analog space habitat, specially abled people can be included. Because in my point of view, it really is possible. Also for me, for example, I couldn't, for example, as it's a natural thing and the development, not participate myself within EVAs, extravehicular activities, within my analog mission, as the purpose of, or the heart, within the heart of an analog mission are EVAs. And EVAs are either often in extreme environments, or the, let's say, moon or Mars surface is being simulated in a very authentic way. So in a very rocky terrain where a wheelchair could, or myself with a wheelchair could not move. But in this case, which I've also experienced for myself within Lunares, specially abled people can definitely be included within the mission control center, or having other duties within analog missions. So this is maybe, we're not at the end of the talk, but already now giving you some food for thought about how potentially you could include specially abled people within your analog habitats to make space exploration and analog space world more accessible, and besides that, not less important, also promote the fulfillment of the SDG 10.
Yes.
Yeah. But this, Roxy, leads me to my last question already, okay. Which would be, let us take a look into the future.
Yeah.
What do you believe will be the most significant hurdles in pushing for inclusivity in space exploration, particularly for individuals with disabilities, but other also minorities or even also women on the third hand. What strategies do you think will be necessary to overcome these challenges and achieve a truly inclusive space sector? We have talked about policies, so I think we can reiterate if necessary, but then you could also present your points. How would you think such a policy would have to look like? But you can comment on this question in whatever way you like.
Yeah, one of the policies, for example, I was mentioning was the criteria specifically on how to select what is the ideal astronaut to be selected. So this specifically has been a traditional perspective or a traditional criteria, and this can also be changed. Maybe for this one, not necessarily a specific policy, but just as a strategy. The next thing I will mention is always considering, as we are expecting and as we are talking in the future, considering that we will have people with special abilities to be included in the space sector, which will mean how are going to be spacesuits built, how are spacecrafts going to be built. So I think that nowadays, since we're having a huge growth of the private sector, start through involving how the spacecraft should be built. For example, if we have crews that involve or have people with disabilities, that the spacecraft is built a certain way, or the spacesuit should be adapted to that special or that person who is part of the crew member. So these are some policies that can be considered, because I think there should be policies for like how to build the spacecrafts and spacesuits. So these are some of the proposals or some of the ideas I could give. And another thing, I think it's important, since you mentioned there are a lot of analog mission centers here in our audience. So also considering how, from your perspective, from your point of view, what is the best way you can start including people with disabilities in your missions, in your centers? Sometimes you might think, oh, it is a hard situation, or I have to do a lot of extra work. But think about also the whole knowledge that you will be bringing in, which is highly important, because you want to be doing experiments, you want to be doing discoveries. So you are going to be bringing new perspectives and new knowledge. And even studies have shown that the more diverse a group is, the more inclusive a group is, the more information and knowledge you can bring out of it. So think about that too when you're doing your missions and selecting the groups. And lastly, I will say it's also important to work on protocols. Of course, this if you start including people with disabilities, which we hope you do in the future for those who haven't yet. But working on the safety protocols as well is important. As Tomas said when he was in Lunares, these were some of the very important points to look at when there was either an EVA, communication. These are important topics, so I will say those mainly.
Yeah. Besides talking about serious jokes, but serious things, now a quick joke. And I think an analog astronaut should be also skilled to rescue kind of frogs and toads, as we have had to during our mission, being in constant also discussion with the MCC, but the frog, the toad, survived. So, but it's very good to have also these skills. No, but like let's turn to the serious things. I would maybe like to add on that. What also could be helpful for analog habitats and all the organizational stuff behind that is that they're maybe also lacking standardized criteria. Yes. And standardized and adapted protocols for missions with specially abled people, or even before that, standardized protocols and rules, which I have one of the last days talked to Charlotte from IC Space to how should an analog habitat look like from the space architectural perspective? Again, making now a statement or a suggestion would not be serious from my side, because each and every disability is really different. But nevertheless, I would say there are some standardized protocols and rules that still can be made, and this is also one of the goals of PARACHASM. After now having analyzed the space architectural points, valid points out of the studies within Lunares, we are now going to analyze all the possible obstacles that have been mentioned, and PARACHASM is then dedicated to create a list of really essential, let's say, universal requirements for analog habitats which they might need to adapt their analog habitat. And based on these, for example, such policies can happen. But also, what is really important is that, for example, as it's obvious that space travel becomes safer, but you cannot avoid every risk still, and there is still, and there will still remain, kind of likelihood that something happens not only during a space flight, but also if we imagine that we are going someday in the future maybe colonize a planet. If we are living on that planet, there is a chance that something will happen. Therefore, also PARACHASM aims with partners to simulate also disabilities with non-disabled crews, like sudden disabilities, and how to cope with that, as this is also a very highly relevant topic. And I've talked about a lot about also myself and my appearance as the first wheelchair-using analog astronaut. But in fact, this discussion, this topic, should not and definitely is not about myself. This is definitely about a goal to raise awareness on the one hand, and on the other hand, taking action and to make, in whatever sense, space as inclusive as possible. And I can guarantee, as the founder and the leader of PARACHASM, but also as a member of SGAC, and particularly the Diversity and Gender Equality Project Group and the Divinas long-term project, that both of these initiatives are trying to get to this point and trying to support in order to create this inclusive environment.
Yeah, that's the reason why you need to work with us for us to continue working together on finding solutions, finding ways, and bringing, of course, always the perspective. Like you said, you use your example. I think that's the best way to put out and show that it is possible. Like you said, Lunares was able to do it, and that's the biggest example to see that space can be for all.
Definitely. And I am afraid that we are running out of time, so we have to wrap up now here the discussion, but we are happy to take any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Just before the questions, a little of something we also happy to share is part of PARACHASM, and actually with some people here in the room and mostly Master Society UK, we've been looking into developing a pressurized spacesuit that would be modulable. And with the aim basically that you could adapt to different sizes, different kinds of body types, but also different kinds of disabilities. And this is going to be a very big focus for CHASM, for PARACHASM, and I think it's something that's going to change a lot of things for the Analogue game. So this is something we're really, really happy. It's very early in the concept, but I think we're going to do something really great, and we're really grateful for all the teams and all the people who support this. I think there's a question there.
Yeah. Hey, so yeah. Yeah, also being like an idle member in that group, I can confirm that it's an exciting team of people working in a really cool niche. Hey, thanks to the both of you for your important work and outlining everything you do up here. And let me start with a corny remark. You would be surprised to learn how much time we devoted in the last MOD mission in ramp building, because apparently also lots of the experiments are wheel-based and kind of confined to the same constraints that sort of wheelchairs user experience. So I've been thinking, like, while you were talking mostly about the built world, because this is of course what we can influence and like influence and shape future architects or future space architects to reflect on traversability for wheelchair users. I was always also thinking about the outside world and like the ways that flight planners and traverse planners use remote sensing and creating traversability and cost maps for rovers to navigate, that it kind of loosely, and this is where I'm kind of thinking along now, kind of loosely resembles also the way of thinking, like which terrain is safe to use, safe to drive on for robots. How does the experience of people like remotely operating rovers with VR glasses relates to like the experience of a wheelchair user? I know that you cannot directly compare these to spheres, but I think there's maybe that somewhere in there hidden also like a way of thinking about the outside world from a different perspective. And anything else? No, that's basically everything. Just a thought that I would want to put to you on the stage, and I don't know whether there's something to reflect on or reply on from your side. Otherwise, I will gladly, shut up.
Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. Very good. So I have a question with regard to the scope of what you would consider disabilities. Perhaps something as simple as like colorblindness or more complex medical condition, basically not just mobility disabilities, but also medical conditions. Is that considered in your scope of research?
So we are defining disability very, very broadly, and this is definitely also a topic that falls within the definition of a disability. We have not particularly yet kind of tackled these kinds of medical issues, but these are also, or might be, or definitely are relevant medical circumstances in one or other processes. And what I maybe wanted to say that all these thoughts that I've shared with you are also you should be aware, kind of try to formulate it in a universal way, but still are kind of from someone being a wheelchair user. So if we would have had a third panelist here, Axel, who is also part of CHASM, PARACHASM, who has another very different disability, he could have commented on even the space architecture and the state of Lunaris or whatever situation in a completely different way. So it's a very, very unique view of every disabled person which you will get.
Yes, and from my side, we also have it very broad, but we have started working, for example, just with hearing impaired individuals. So that perspective is also completely different from what the perspective of Thomas or Axel. And in our case, for example, it was before we hearing directly from a deaf person, we might have just thought about like how might be the best way. The person using a computer communicating with the rest of the crew members, and then we're separating that crew member from the rest of the crew members, so it is not actually being inclusive. So after hearing directly the perspective of the person, we see that what about the rest of the team learning sign language? And then they will be able to communicate better with each other. So the experiences of each disability will be completely different, but as we start including each one of those, the improvements will start growing and growing, and we will start including a huge number of people.
Even if I may add, at least within Lunaris, but I can imagine that these exercise, this process, this protocol is performed in many habitats. We had an emergency communication exercise, and I remember, or I would like to show just one site, which again shows you that also some standardized protocols would be maybe helpful, that within our emergency scenario, I hope it's not confidential to check this sign and the scenario, but the OK sign was this. But if you refer to the diving sign language, OK is this, and this means you have to go up. So this might be a bit misleading, and maybe our sign language interpreters even can show us how being okay means in the British Sign Language. Maybe it's even, again, a different sign. So making a consent here would be really, really appropriate. Thanks.
Yeah, sorry, you'll have to pry the phone from a cold dead hands. Let's just one brief remark. We actually at OV have implemented like a procedure like that, since most of the analog astronauts are also divers. They kind of applied the diving symbol chart to do like the symbol like hand sign based communication while they're on the quad bikes, while they're suffering from loss of communication, for instance. So they actually use that in the missions as well. So it's like simple things like, I have no comms, let's go back to base. Are you okay with that? Good, let's go. Or my ventilation is off, I'm hot. Stuff like that. They can actually communicate non-verbally. So that's already applied in Austrian Space Forum, but of course there needs to be standardization and proper vetting and culturally improvement of the whole thing. Yeah.
Thank you for that point.
Thank you. Even sign language changes based on the language. So British Sign Language is different from the US Sign Language, and Spanish is also completely different. Someone had a question there.
Hi, so I'm with the Analogue research group from APUS. We actually developed just to try with EVAs, because we were learning that communication with EVAs using hand signals and not being able to see your face within the helmet can be very limiting. And we were actually kind of bringing in those who are ASL specialists to help us develop signals, because we were also using signals that were unique to like the military that we're familiar with for combat movements. Have you guys thought about developing kind of like a universal, not ASL, but universal sign language that can be used on EVAs that would be understandable by those who are deaf or hard of hearing?
That's a great point, actually. And so our first stage of the experiment, which is what I explained, then we are starting now to work with people who are hearing impaired. We want to start understanding what will be the best method to not have these differences. For example, either Spanish Sign Language, English Sign Language, British Sign Language are different. So in our case, since we're working with hearing impaired individuals, what would be the best way to have a crew which is mixed with hearing impaired people, but also hearing people? What would be the best way? So these are some of the points that we are considering and seeing as part of the methods that we will start including, because always these experiments or methods that we're working on are to be proved if they are wrong or if they will be the best way to use. So thank you for actually mentioning.
Yeah, well, and so just to kind of add on to that, another thing, you know, when you're using ASL, a lot of it is dexterity, and you don't have that when you have your gloves on. And so trying to find the right hand signals when you have your gloves on to make the right letters or word. But in addition to that, we were also wondering, because it's been not an official test on the ISS, but astronauts have used sign language to engage with the public. And with the changes in microgravity, what that does to the facial expression and when you're expressing words. So that's why I'm kind of asking, like, how to combat that, not only when you're wearing a suit, but if we're in orbit or somewhere else where there's reduced gravity, the effects of the face when using sign language.
And it also even comes down to the spacesuits, I would say, because how the spacesuits are being designed, like you say, the globes are huge, and if you need to bend your fingers, you wouldn't be able probably to do it or in the right way. So what is the sign that you're actually doing so I can understand it better? But how about those other spacesuits, for example, the recent spacesuits like SpaceX, that maybe the globes are not as huge as the traditional ones, that may help and also doing better signs. So we are working on that, and so it will be great to also like see some other opinion from the audience too, because that's also like data collection for us to see new perspectives, and that we can also include it as part of the study. Thank you.
I actually have a question. So I'm curious for the PARACHASM guys, as you found ways to enable for example, like yourself, to be involved, or those who are hearing impaired, et cetera, during these analog missions. Did you, by happenstance, find that it actually made things like not just communication between, for example, like hearing-enabled people, disabled people, et cetera, easier, but also did it perhaps improve the architecture or the ability of the non-disabled to do their mission or to communicate, or like if you had like a flashing light during an emergency, I can hear this thing, but I also see this flashing light, oh, something's going on. I'm curious if you saw that as well. Does that make sense what I'm asking here? If the changes you made to enable things for, like example, yourself or others, did that also help the those that are not necessarily specially abled as well, to make their lives a little easier in the analog?
Within my mission, I haven't experienced this, as I was the only person having a disability during my mission. I'm now thinking about the missions within Lunaris, and I don't think there was a person with who was hearing impaired. Yeah, unfortunately, I cannot comment really. And
Thomas, I can save you on that one. So during my mission, during a mission preceding mine, somebody made a tablet holder. We used tablet to communicate during EVA. Of course, cannot hold the tablet and push to talk at the same time. The squelch, you know the system that will start the push-to-talk automatically was not working great. So they had a tablet holder, or we had a tablet holder that we adapted for me, which worked fine. And actually the following EVA, the able people just used it, and it made their life easier. So that would be an example in the case you were mentioning, for example.
Maybe there is, yeah?
I will try to keep it short then.
Yeah.
I was imagining on the other side, and for example, I'm imagining Christiane. She wants to prove her new habitat and ideas, and you are now kind of an expert. Having been through a mission, you have gained some knowledge, and you know what to look for more readily. And do you have a certain number of people who went through that with different abilities that are I don't know which word you were using, sorry, but like a wheelchair or not hearing or blind, that you could propose to those entities that you come all together and go through this new habitat or this older habitat to give, thanks to your expertise, all the things that could be done from the more structural ones down to some very small and actually very interesting one, like Axel just said. Did you already created this list of people who can give their feedback, who are passionate and who know about space and who wants to be involved in this bigger field? And if yes, is it something that you think you could propose, or are you going down this road of proposing to proof any new habitat thanks to your expertise, so that you can give a stamp saying, yes, actually we went through that and it is a good place, or it is good to this level for people with abilities impairment?
Yeah, so thank you for that question. Short answer, there are really just a couple of people with a disability who completed an Analogue mission. While preparing for this talk, I've heard that there is like a Biosphere who did also a mission with a person with a disability. But I think there were like very few missions. Most of them were conducted at Lunares, and for sure I could imagine that we could, let's say, build a group and then also approach people like Christiane who are looking for the validation of their habitats and projects from different disabilities. I was actually even planning to approach Christiane right afterwards, yeah.
From my side, I just wanted to say the purpose behind Divinas or a specific research is to do that. That the research we complete, that we can also propose it to Analogue mission centers so that they can try to, or together we can try to implement it and see if it's a good method or not. As far as I know, in terms of like Analogue mission centers that have had inclusive missions is Lunares. Biosphere had blind people in one of their crews. But Astro Access hasn't done, they had members from their organization in Biosphere, but they have mainly been doing a lot of gravitational experiments with having wheelchair users using the gravity zero, doing experiments in gravity zero or amputee people. So this is so far what has been done. But in Divinas, just so you know, and I'm glad that we are collaborating with PARACHASM, that most of this work that we're doing, the intention is that we can implement it and find partners that are willing to help us implement it and see if it works, so it can be added as a part of a protocol or to open up the applications to more people.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So thank you very much to both of you. We still have to go through one more talk, actually. So thank you so much for all the efforts and for being there today. So big bravo to both of them.